There's a new report that there's no contract coming for Walker Kessler, with some reasoning why. Let's talk about if we should believe it or not. The Hoops Nerd Show. All right, guys, before we get started, like the video, subscribe to the channel. Let's get into this. So, Tony Jones, who is, by the way, going to Philadelphia, I'm bummed about it, although he keeps breaking Utah Jazz news. Just broke a story today talking about how Walker Kessler and the Utah Jazz are not going to come to an agreement on a contract extension this season. It's likely to kind of answer some questions that I know I have had, and any of you that are kind of watching this situation closely. Walker Kessler right now is eligible for a contract extension, and he's been eligible for a month or two. It's been a while, and, you know, I've talked about it a little bit, but it's something that I've wondered about. Why haven't they done it? Well, Tony Jones talked about it today in his latest article in The Athletic. Here's what he says, basically why the Jazz haven't done it. He says, the answer is simple: money, and the NBA is a business. The Jazz see themselves trying to end their time near the bottom of the Western Conference standings as soon as next summer. So that's interesting. We got some that the Jazz are thinking about becoming better after this season, just to be clear. By not signing Kessler now, he would have a cap hold of $14.9 million next summer, which would give the Jazz enough space to keep Kessler's hold and still do work in free agency. Then the Jazz and Kessler theoretically can come to an agreement. Because Utah holds Kessler's bird rights, the Jazz would be able to exceed the cap by signing him. If Utah extends Kessler now, his cap hold would be whatever that contract dictates, which could make the franchise less flexible from a money standpoint. So, Tony Jones, in this article, goes on to explain that the Jazz have talked with Kessler and shown him the finances and visited his home in Atlanta, which is great. Basically, what this comes down to is a couple of things. If the Jazz signed Walker Kessler now to, you know, whatever that contract would be, let's say it was $25 million, which to me is too high, then they would have Walker Kessler on the books. If they don't, then that gives them some cap space going through up to this offseason. That cap space would allow them to make some moves. If you make a trade and you need to bring a player in through trade, you can bring them into that cap space. Now, I'm not a caps expert, and I may be explaining things a little bit not completely correctly, but I think that's just the general idea. For example, if Utah goes into this next upcoming offseason and has like $14.9 million in cap space, then they could theoretically, when free agency starts, sign someone in that cap space and then sign Kessler to a deal and use his bird rights and go over the cap. That's what bird rights do. They allow you to keep a player on your team and re-sign them, even if it makes you go over the cap. That's one of the things that's nice about the NBA cap, and still there, is that you can have your bird rights and you can keep your players. So that's the idea. If they signed Kessler now, then they don't really have that cap space to use this upcoming offseason. Now, probably Occam's razor easiest answer, but then I have a few questions about this, and it does make me think a few things about the situation. If let's say Ace Bailey just hits and is incredible. Let's say Ace Bailey turns into, like, you know, Paul George 2.0 and is just fantastic, and on both ends of the floor is just an impact player. And let's say 3 years down the road, Utah's in this situation with Bailey that they're in with Kessler, and they know that they want him to be a cornerstone of the future. Chances are Utah would just give him the contract, right? You just send him the max, right? Isn't that what we do? That's what they did with Donovan Mitchell. It's what they did with Rudy Gobert. I know Rudy Gobert's took a little bit longer. There was some weight there, but they were definitely not messing around with Donovan Mitchell, knowing that there was some volatility there. And maybe that's a little bit of what's going with Kessler. Maybe Kessler's laid back and is like, you know, I'm fine waiting. Kind of, you know, Utah kind of had some negotiations with Rudy Gobert back in the day. If you remember, it took a little time. and we had to wait into the offseason before they finally got that figured out, and it became like a near max instead of a full max, whatever. You know, maybe Walker Kessler is a little bit like that, where he's kind of okay figuring it out. But it's a little different because Walker Kessler is coming on to his second contract, and we don't know what that contract's going to be, right? $25 million is a lot for a center that doesn't spread the floor. Yes, he rim runs, and so he creates gravity by running to the rim, and that's definitely valuable. He is not a very good free throw shooter. So if that free throw shooting, and it's been 3 seasons now, doesn't get better, then you can't play him at the end of games because it's going to be Hack Kessler. There's some question marks. And year 2 for Kessler was really bad. Like really bad. And so, you know, there's some question marks there. So yes, it makes sense in terms of cap flexibility and the NBA is a business and blah, 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 blah. But Utah's also needing to find out if this guy's worth what Walker Kessler's camp is probably asking for, right? I mean, they're not going to say in this article that Walker Kessler's asking for this and Utah wants to pay this. And Tony Jones, to his credit, does mention something like that. You know, this paragraph he said where he says, if Kessler plays, say, 35 minutes a night, those numbers could increase, perhaps significantly, and talking about contract. And that could increase his market value. It remains to be seen just how much a front office led by Austin and Danny Ainge would be willing to pay a traditional center. One of the reasons Gobert was dealt was because Danny Ainge didn't want to continue to pay him $40 million a year. Right? And, you know, Walker Kessler's not going to command $40 million a year like Rudy Gobert got. But you know, that's a lot of money for a center that doesn't spread the floor, that doesn't do a lot of things outside of protect the rim, rebound, block shots, and then, you know, catch lobs on offense. It's tough. And if they're going to ask for like 25 to 30 million, kind of the market value for some of these centers that have been changing teams, that's really tough. Now, on top of this, if by not doing this, this does mean that Walker Kessler is going to restricted free agency. And that does open up some different avenues of risk. For example, Tony Jones mentions the Lakers, which he's correct. He talks about how the Lakers have had interest. We know this because I've written about it and talked about it, but the Lakers for the last 2 seasons have had a lot of interest in Walker Kessler. And I think that Laker team is, there's some interesting things going on with the Lakers because LeBron James is a 50-something million contract. It's massive. He's been trying to put pressure on them, and they have not given LeBron James an extension. And I don't think they want to pay LeBron James another $55 million contract next year. We might see LeBron go somewhere else or retire. And if they have $54 million in cap space and they want to throw something crazy at Walker Kessler to try to lure him away from the Jazz, restricted free agency is where you get those contracts that are more than what a player's worth because they're trying to get that player to come away. So they may give Walker Kessler a big contract. Let's say they throw $35 million at him and it's a huge overpay because they know that the Jazz don't want to pay something like that. They may get him. And then you lose Kessler for nothing. And what makes this interesting is Utah is very much not going to win a lot of games this year. They are interested in a top pick in the draft. And if they go through another tanking year and then Walker Kessler goes for like an insane amount of money to another team, does Utah really want to pay a big time contract like that, a restricted free agency contract, poison pill, and go into the season with like multiple young players? Like, you know, there's a world where one of the young players the Jazz have drafted really hits. What if Bryce Sensabaugh just goes crazy and figures things out? What if Taylor Hendricks takes another leap? What if, what if Ace Bailey is incredible? Obviously don't have to pay him yet, but if you have, you start adding bad contracts on your books, it adds up really quick. You only have so much money and the CBA is so strict and you can't afford to be giving these guys crazy contracts, you know? So if your plan is to kind of hopefully not pay more than like 25 million to Walker Kessler, and the Lakers come and offer him like 32 or something crazy because they want a rim runner next to Luka Doncic, and they think that a pairing of Luka and Walker Kessler would be really good, and they're willing to pay that money, that's pretty scary stuff. And if you get a whiff of that and it gets too close, you start running into problems, guys. And the Jazz have already started running into problems with Lauri Markkanen's contract because it's $46 million, and he's like a top 50 player in the league. I think the Ringer ranked him in like 48, and you could quibble about if it should be better than that. But he's not better than late 30s, guys. Making $46 million a year, that's going to make that contract difficult to trade if anyone wants to trade for it. Now, there are suitors. We know there are, and Utah likely makes a trade this offseason, according to Zach Lowe. But man, if you have another bad contract in Walker Kessler, it gets hard to get out of bad money contracts and also get money back. The biggest thing that Utah has been doing, and this is why it does lend some credence to what Tony Jones is doing, is that Utah has been bringing on contracts that are expiring. You know, a lot of these players that are coming on, like the most recent one we've talked about, Kevin Love, it's an expiring deal. It will open up cap space for this Jazz team so that this upcoming offseason, they can go make some moves. If their whole cap space situation is used up on Walker Kessler because they go into restricted free agency, that's not great if you're trying to win. You've got to make good moves. You've got to get good deals. And guess what? Walker Kessler is not the only one you're going to have to give contract to. You know, Keontae George, Bryce Sensabaugh, you know, these guys are going to start having contracts come up too, and you're going to have to make decisions. Are you going to trade all of them, or are you going to try to give them sensible deals? We'll see, but things are going to get interesting. Taylor Hendricks is going to be a really interesting contract year. Utah has to play Taylor Hendricks a good amount this year to find out how much he is worth. And, you know, so this contract with Walker Kessler is huge. I do think that this is going to mean that there are going to be some teams making some phone calls, and if they can get the bird rights, and I can't remember exactly if I believe those bird rights, I don't know. Guys, I don't know all the different cap situations, but what I do know is if you give a bad contract to a player, it's hard to get out of, and you got to be careful. And the biggest way to get a really bad contract is going into restricted free agency and having a team. It only takes one team to throw a crazy offer or something that you don't want to have to match. Need we be reminded of the Gordon Hayward contract situation? Utah went into restricted free agency with him, and this was kind of the opposite. They should have just given him the good contract instead of waiting. This situation, they probably shouldn't give him a bad contract, but their same situation, going to restricted free agency, just does not end up always having good outcomes. You tend to have bad ones. With Gordon Hayward, it was it was like a 3-year with a player option, that Utah would have been able to give him a 4-year bigger contract and would have had him the 4 years and might not have lost him at all had they not done that. If Utah does this and they have the Lakers come in and offer like 35 million and still have 20 million in cap space for other players, things get really tough really fast. And so anyways, guys, this is kind of a longer video. I wanted to talk about it, but this is something that's not just cut and dry. There is more going on with this than what is being talked about. Like and subscribe to the channel, guys. Bad ending. Hopefully it was a good video, just kind of long. I will talk to you next time.